those of you who don't know me, I'm Manan. I'm a consultant in the home treatment team and the clinical director for adult services. We co-founded Promise together. So I'll be following Naomi's fingerprints with footprints of my own. What I'm about to share with you is not something I've done in a big forum like this before, and it's quite personal. 22nd June 2006, I was a specialist registrar in Oxford, working in an assertive outreach team. My team contacted me to engage in a mental health act assessment. The patient concerned was someone I knew quite well. I'd seen him about a month or so back, and I believe we had fairly good rapport. Family had become increasingly concerned that he was getting unwell, he had stopped his medication, he was more paranoid and suspicious. He had a past history of violence and aggression, so the team said if we're going to do a mental health act assessment, we should involve the police, and the police attendant, two kind of policemen came with us. So we went to this person's house, the mother ushered us in, a social worker, myself, a GP, his GP and a GP trainee, and two policemen. The two policemen stayed outside. We went in, we sat down. He came, was quite happy to see me actually, shook hands with me, and sat down right beside me. It was one of those settees into which you sink in. The social worker started explaining why we were there, and suddenly, from the corner of my eye, I saw a fist coming towards me, and it landed on my lips. He was training to be a boxer, and he packed a punch. It was like one of those Hollywood movies where things tend to slow down. You know, blood splattered everywhere, my kind of glasses kind of gone somewhere, dropped the notes, tried to get out of the settee, and seemed almost paralyzed to get out of the settee, and he was shouting abuse from like a foot away from me. Managed to get out. The policemen were the first to run away. They were off. Anyway, I ran out of the door. I could hear him kind of screaming behind me. I could hear his mother pleading him to stop. The police were on their radio. The verbal tirade continued for another 5 minutes or so, and within 5 minutes, the two vans turned up and took him away. So the police were very responsive. From there, it was back to base, and because I was pretty banged up at that point, my consultant said, right, you have to go to A&E. So we went to A&E, where I got violently pushed and prodded by a junior doctor, who I thought did me more damage than the initial assault. And she said, oh my God, I still remember the expression on her face that I want Max Fax to take a look at you. And I was going, I could barely speak by that point. I'm not letting anyone touch me. And anyway, the Max Fax chap came. X-rays did not show any fractures, but he kind of announced pretty royally that, well, there's no blood supply going to your teeth at the moment. Your gums are so swollen. So by tomorrow, your tooth would have become non-viable. The front four, at least the top incisors, they will turn black over the next few months, and you will most probably lose them. So at that point, I couldn't care less. I just didn't want anyone to touch me on my mouth and push me and prod me. So went back to the base. My consultant told me not to drive. Of course, I drove back home. So when I got home, my wife, Mon, was, she was pretty disturbed to see me in that state. But anyway, I didn't want to talk about it. It's a different matter. I couldn't speak as well because my mouth was so swollen. My in-laws were visiting from India. I was very embarrassed that they saw me in that state. I remember lying down beside my 11-week-old daughter, Mahi. I graphically remember the softness of her touch and the comfort I found in that. And I was physically and mentally exhausted, but I just couldn't fall asleep. It was not so much that the assault was playing on my head. It was more that I thought I had a good relationship with him. And how could he have done it? You know, there was a breach of trust, and that kept playing through my head. Anyway, I must have drifted off at some point. Next morning, I was quite resolute not to get underneath my skin. My mouth was even more swollen next morning, so I stayed indoors. The day after that, the swelling went, And, well, 10 years on, thank you, Mr. Registrar, I still have my teeth. They haven't turned black. So they're still there in one piece, in case you were wondering whether I've got false tooth. So I did not want this to get to me. So I think it was 4 days' time, another Mental Health Act assessment came up, and I said, right, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to get it out of my system. Unfortunately, even in that Mental Health Act assessment, and it's damn bad luck to have 2 assessments like that, there was a lot of violence. The chap had a glass ashtray, he threw it to the wall, which smashed into 1 million pieces, chased the social worker down the hall, and kept kicking the door of the office. And police were brilliant. They responded within 2 minutes, and he calmed down very quickly when the police turned up. And that second incident really shook me. And for a long time, at least for 3-4 months, I was quite anxious around difficult clinical interactions. A slight change in someone's voice, and I could feel my heart racing. Thankfully, it's been 10 years, and I haven't had any such overt aggression since then. There have been many difficult clinical conversations, a lot of the time using coercion subtly to get people to engage in home treatment so that we don't have to bring them into hospital. But I haven't been at the receiving end of such aggression. It's been a long time, but I still find myself getting quite emotional talking about this. Of course, this is my own perspective. It must have been very different from the patient perspective about how it must have felt for him, how alone must he have felt, knowing that his family had been in cahoots with these people who are going to take him away. You know, we had turned up with clear intention to take his liberties away. And it was, you know, recovering from this was a fairly lonely affair, because as a doctor, we kind of don't really talk about stuff like this. You just get on with it and somehow pull up your boots. So it was a lonely affair, recovering from this. And it was in that loneliness I started to develop empathy for what the patient would have gone through and how lonely must he feel. Yes, staff who are carrying out the Mental Health Act assessment would feel they're acting in the best interest of the patient, and they're acting out of necessity. And often family also are in agreement with that. But that's not a perspective that's available to the patient at that point in time. So that kind of, when you look at it in the cold light of day, it seems completely unprovoked. But was it unprovoked? I was the one who had turned up at the patient's door with police. He was a boxer, so he responded in the way he knew best. Of course, I'm not saying that anyone deserves to be assaulted in the line of their work. No one does. But somehow being able to reframe it allowed me to kind of make sense of what the patient's world would have been like. You know, my own incident has helped me empathize with a lot of what our staff actually go through every day, you know, being at the receiving end of violence or irritability or aggression. And that makes me even more resolute in making the case for promise, in making the case for change, because coercion breeds resentment and frustration, and it's our frontline staff who end up getting that back. You know, to this day, I wonder whether, whether he knew what he was doing. Our colleagues on dementia wards tell us that they often get hit or assaulted by patients. But they say that there's something in the fact that patients are not cognizant of what they're doing, which perhaps makes it more bearable or forgivable. There's a part of me, quite a big part of me, which feels that it doesn't matter. Well, it might have been that he was unwell, but he knew exactly what he was doing. And one can ask, why does that matter? Well, it matters because the pain and the physical trauma does subside fairly quickly. It's the breach of trust which actually takes a fair bit of time to recover from. You know, your ability to engage in caregiving without feeling anxious, that takes time to recover from. And when I look at my emotions, what really stands out is kind of shame. That's what stands out, which is a bizarre emotion to have around this. Why shame? Perhaps I should have known better. Perhaps I should have seen it coming. Perhaps I should have been feeling anxious for those 3 months that I felt anxious about. I guess emotional responses are different for different individuals, but everyone arrives at the same kind of point. Why did it happen? Now, we can reason it away as the patient was unwell, or the patient was inherently aggressive, but that would be a lost opportunity to not ponder over the fact that what it must have felt like to be the patient in that scenario. You know, if you were feeling suspicious and paranoid and your family had gotten behind your back and had got police and a group of individuals to take your liberties away, would you then feel trust in getting care from these people who you think are perpetrators? I wonder, our patients, do they feel shame like I felt after they have been at the receiving end of coercion and force? It's taken me 10 years and a lot of pushing and prodding from Sarah to come out and tell this story. Responsibility of leading Promise has churned all of this up. How many stories like Naomi's or mine remain untold? The hope is that the Promise qualitative study would capture these stories, give us new insights which will form the fingerprints of empathy, and if not being able to walk in each other's footsteps, perhaps patients and professionals can follow each other's footprints. With that, I would like hand over to Kerry, who will talk about the Promise qualitative study. Thank you.